Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Washed Up Weekly Commentary. I am one of your co-hosts, Abby, and this is our other co-host, Colin, and this is our second episode.
We have a busy week this week, tons to get to, and we're also coming to you on Tuesday as opposed to Sunday, Monday due to the holiday and the inauguration, which I'm sure that we're going to get into a lot. But first, just wanted to kind of reflect on last week's episode and some stuff that we learned and have picked up because we're trying to get better each episode. I was reflecting on this new format that we're trying out and how it's very different from print. But I kind of like it because once you stop recording, you just upload it and then it's done, ready to go, as opposed to, with print, there's a lot of post and pre-production work that goes on. So I don't know. What did you think, Abby?
Well, I had to express to Colin before that I didn't think that I sounded eloquent when I talked or like said my opinions in particular. And with writing, I've always been more comfortable with expressing myself with words and having so many people edit and go through my words within the Vista. So that's definitely a change. I will give myself grace when I did listen to our last episode. By the way, I probably was like 50% of the views. Um, I did think that I sounded smarter than I thought in my head, and I thought we sounded good, but we are still improving.
Yeah, it was very interesting to listen to yourself back and hear it all again. I thought that, yeah, I was worried that when I started speaking, like the words just wouldn't come to me or that I would hit like a dead space, but I actually thought that it flowed well, and so I'm looking forward to this conversation too. Yeah, and so I guess we can get started with our first topic. We have the inauguration, obviously. I have this front cover of the Washington Post that I picked up. This photo's been everywhere. I've seen on a bunch of different outlets. It's kind of been craziness, especially because I'm in DC, so have a lot to say about it. They started setting up for the inauguration about, it feels like 2 weeks ago now. And I run in the National Mall every single morning or evening sometimes. And so I've been noticing the slow, steady buildup toward this. And my honest conclusion is that it was all very anticlimactic for a couple of reasons. Well, the security was really, really heavy from the beginning. They set up these like really tall metal barricades at first, and they added in like concrete barricades, and then they shut down different parts of downtown throughout the week. And actually, I told Abby this story, but it was kind of jarring one of the earlier days when they're setting up, they had some police tape set up in by the Washington Monument, and I was jogging by and I came across it and I kind of like ducked under it to go through instead of around because there was people playing in the snow, building snowmen. Like it wasn't this serious thing in my mind. And in California, I feel like police tape, you see it in many different contexts, not just like a police situation. But as soon as I ducked under this tape, there was a cop who had his eyes went like super wide and he yelled at me and he was like, "Hey." And then I stopped and like I saw the fear in his eye and he pulled up his jacket and he was like, "Police." And so I saw a badge and I even think I saw a gun, so I kind of turned around. I was like, "Sorry," and I hightailed it out of there. But all of that is to say, they've been very involved in setting up for this, and there was a lot of thought and preparation that went into it. I don't really like it because obviously I just wanted to like enjoy the park and be outside and run. But I understand the reason why they're being heavy-handed with it. Obviously, you've had two assassination attempts on Trump in the past year, and they're really trying to lock it down and make sure that it's going to be safe and secure. Um,
Mhm.
but again, it was kind of anticlimactic because then the inauguration ended up being indoors. So did you have any thoughts on that, Abby?
Yeah, I'm so glad you told that story. I actually in Vegas, because that's where I am right now, I also saw a bunch of people kind of gathered around like the airport. I passed the airport on the way home from my 9 to 5, And I saw some people holding up signs talking about how they were going to protest and stuff. And that's why I really liked that. I really like that Colin's in DC because, Colin, you get to be in kind of the meat of it. And I mean, if I'm seeing protests and stuff on the West Coast, I could only imagine, the measures in DC for that. And I agree with you about the security thing, but yeah, I could see how that's annoying and interesting when it ended up inside anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely made me wonder, and I'm writing about this for Substack too, but it made me wonder like how much money went into setting up the
Hmm.
entire mall because it's about, I don't know, it's several blocks from the Capitol building to the monument, and that whole area was like on lockdown for 2 weeks, and so much went into it. I was wondering like how much money did they pour into that? And ultimately, was it necessary or was it kind of a waste? Um, I don't know, but certainly I don't like the optics of it either. I think it's kind of problematic to have like separation between the people in power and the rest of us, I guess.
Right.
And like on a psychological level, I know that they did this during Biden's inauguration as well, because that was right after January 6th and they were trying to like keep it, I don't know, safe. And so that was kind of in my memory the first time that they really went through all this security measures and everything. Um, but it seems like it's escalated in recent times, and I hope it doesn't become like a fixture of our political existence where
Yeah.
like
New norm.
we're like the people aren't really trusted to be a part of the process. And that's kind of how it felt the whole weekend. Um, and then you kind of saw that manifesting itself too across, I would say, class lines at the actual inauguration itself. There was certainly felt like a lot of separation between the very, very wealthy people who were in the rotunda with Trump himself during the actual ceremony versus all of his supporters who came from across the country to stand in line to get into Capital One Arena. And yeah, I don't know. I felt like there was just such a stark contrast there that I would be remiss not to comment on it. But yeah, what did you think of it watching it from the TV, Abby?
Yeah, I also did not like that. Um, I don't, yeah, I don't like that. I agree that we should be a part of this occasion. And people on social media have kind of been taking that photo that's like been trending of like the those like billionaire tech bros. Like I think it was Elon Musk was there, Mark Zuckerberg in the front, and then the cabinet the cabinet sat like right behind them. And I've been seeing that kind of go around a lot. I already don't like the idea of the fact that Trump's billionaire besties get to be front row. And I've been seeing a lot of people talk about how our country's acting more like an oligarchy. And for if people don't know what that means, it's kind of just when a smaller group of people have control over our bigger country, which is like not how America's supposed to be run, of course. Um, we're a republic. And I just think, even if it's just for show, I still just think that it's anti-democratic and it's exclusive and not what we're supposed to be presenting to the mass country, basically.
Yeah, and I should actually mention too, on Sunday they had a big pre-inauguration rally, and I went to go check it out to I was hoping to interview some people who are Trump supporters and just see what was the situation was on the ground. But this pre-inauguration rally on Sunday was held at Capital One Stadium. And some people had been there since like 8 a.m. to line up in the freezing cold, by the way. This entire weekend has been like 20 degrees or less, it felt like.
Jesus.
But everyone was like lined up for hours and hours and hours. And I actually kind of snuck by and got in like the middle of the line. I'm not gonna disclose how I did that, but um, it was totally above board. There was just a little like pause in the line, and I kind of like inserted myself. But there was other people who were cutting the line throughout the whole time, and people were getting very angry for obvious reasons. Like it
Mhm.
felt very high school, like or even middle school, where they were kind of calling each other out, like cutter, 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 and just kind of like shaming each other, being very
Yeah.
like skeptical and cynical. And I totally understand why, because it really was freezing and frankly kind of miserable. But I don't know. There's some rhetoric about like, oh, look how unified everyone is at the inauguration in their support of Trump. That really wasn't my experience at all. I felt like there was a lot of infighting among the supporters. And then you had that class divide that was really obvious from the people at the ceremony to the people who had to stand in line in the freezing cold. Many of them, I would imagine, didn't even get into the stadium. I didn't get into the stadium, even though I was waiting for 2.5 hours because people eventually it kind of just mobbed. Like once everyone realized that there was limited seating and they weren't going to get in despite having waited that that long, everyone
Mhm.
just like swarmed and pushed forward, and it felt very unsafe and chaotic. Oh, I should also mention that the Sunday event and the Monday inauguration at Capital One were both unticketed events. And so they could have easily made this ticketed like a $30 fee or something, and people could
Yeah.
have like capped it and said like, okay, it only seats 20,000 people, cap it at that, and then we won't have this like mob form outside.
Hmm.
I honestly, the point when I left was when I realized that like, oh, this is intentional. Like they want people to mob and to be a really big like group to like show like, oh, look how badly everyone wants to go see Trump. And then like I honestly felt like I was like being used as a pawn, and I was like, I'm out of here. And I was miserable from the rain. But
Yeah, that's a really good description, being used as a pawn, especially when that's kind of like Trump's whole thing. He always talks about how he has the biggest crowds ever and how he's the most popular president that there's ever been and stuff like that. So I'm sorry that you had to wait in the cold, but to hear your experience firsthand is really interesting.
it was definitely worth it just to hear what people were saying to each other, how they were like treating each other and acting. When it started hailing at one point, there was a woman behind me who made a really funny comment about like for next it's going to be the locust and then the plague, and like as long as they don't come for our firstborn, like that was the worst of all of the plagues of Egypt or whatever. And so that was funny, but also like shows you how miserable it really was. And then another woman said something like, I'm not used to being corralled. This doesn't feel very egalitarian. And I thought that was obviously true as well. So, yeah, all in all, it was good to go and like see what was going on and like be a part of it. But then I realized being a part of it was sort of not how I want it to be. I would have gone like if I had had more like media access or something,
Right.
that would have been a better experience, but I feel like it also kind of would have missed the point a little bit.
Yeah. Well, if you did have media access, you probably would have not gotten the experience of the average American. And not saying that I wanted you to do that, but thank you for doing that. And also, yeah, like you said, you got to see that firsthand and stuff like that. So, that's really good and interesting that we got to debrief that with the podcast.
Yeah. And as far as the actual ceremony itself, there was definitely some stuff that stuck out. Like people were saying that Trump didn't put his hand on the Bible when he was doing the swearing in,
Right.
which I have the photo proof of that right here. Obviously, you got Melania holding the Bible and Trump isn't putting his hand on it. And I don't know, like it's kind of weird, but I also think it was probably just like by mistake. I think anytime you have these like very ceremonial type things, people get kind of caught up and lost in it. And it's a simple thing, but I think one commentator I was listening to was like, imagine if Kamala had been elected and didn't put her hand on the Bible, everyone would be freaking out.
Oh my gosh.
So I don't know, that rang true to me. And there was just a couple things about it that like stuck out. Like again, you mentioned sort of like the tech bros being there. Made me feel similar to you, a little bit jaded, a little bit like, come on, is this really how things are gonna go? Like, what does this say about the next 4 years and where loyalties are? And yeah. So did you have any other comments about it before we move on?
I feel like we touched basically what I wanted to touch on for it in regards to everything that is happened since over the weekend and today. Colin and I will not be fully diving into it just because it would be its whole other episode about stuff that Trump has done since today, and we just didn't have time with our 9 to 5 jobs to kind of delve into that before this podcast recording. But I just wanted to give that disclaimer in case anyone was like, "Oh yeah, they just don't want to talk about it." We do, just a lot.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into all of the policy stuff next week podcast. For now, just keeping it to the inauguration and all that. But yeah, if nothing else, we can probably move on to our TikTok ban discussion. So, Abby, I think you've been following that a little bit closer, so go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, just to recap the whole TikTok thing is it's owned by a Chinese company and SCOTUS gave them a deadline to basically sell the app before January 19th to somebody, a different company or a different person, or else it wouldn't be allowed within the US. So I am a TikTok owner. And on the actual day of the 19th, I remember leading up to the 19th, first of all, everyone was in shambles about it. I kind of thought it was a little dramatic, but for comedic purposes, I thought it was funny. Um, on the actual day of the 19th, there was a message that popped up maybe around my time, maybe around, I want to say like noon. I don't remember actually. But it said that President Trump will work on us with a solution basically in regards to the TikTok ban. And then not even like a full day later, like literally the next day, um, it said that as a result of President Trump's efforts, that TikTok was back. And this is just really interesting to me because I'm like, okay, well, he's not even the sitting president in office technically yet. And I don't know, it just seemed very, very weird to me that that happened so fast. Like all of a sudden it was super, um, just wrapped up with a bow. TikTok is back. Shortest ban in history, by the way. And also, if you've kept up with Trump in the past, like he has always been against TikTok and talked a lot about security issues with like China and stuff like that, and which I feel like is a valid take. Like, I mean, maybe it's hypocritical of me to say because I do have TikTok and I do enjoy the app. Um, and I just think that part of the Trump messaging seemed a little bit propaganda-ish to me. Like all of a sudden, people on social media were making jokes, being like, "Thank you so much, Donald Trump," like all this stuff. Um, and it also reminded me of how much Trump kind of talked about Meta and how much he doesn't like it. And now obviously Mark Zuckerberg is an ally of his, and I don't know. TikTok is back and still here. Like I said, very short ban. Colin, your thoughts as somebody who doesn't have TikTok? What do you think about it?
Yeah, so I have never been on TikTok. Well, obviously I've seen TikToks, but like I've never been on it, never had an account or anything like this. I've always just been like a Reels person on Instagram. I feel like I get all the TikToks like a couple months late and it's fine. I don't mind it that way. My main reason for that is just because I feel like people really got sucked in by the app and that made me kind of hesitant about it. I'm like, I already have other social media apps that like draw me and my attention, and do I really want to get another one? And so I never downloaded it, and then I quickly was confirmed in that as I saw other people getting really obsessed with it. And then eventually started hearing about, yeah, the connections to China and ByteDance and all of this. And I mean, that kind of just reaffirmed it for me. Like, if there is a national security risk, then I don't really care to download it since I already don't have it. But I could see, like, banning it, I could see how that would make people angry. It makes me think, like, if the government decided to ban Instagram or YouTube, I would be
Right.
pretty upset about it. I don't know if I would be, I don't know if I would be like actively crying about it on the internet,
Like,
but I would be mad. I'd be like, oh dang, like I get a lot of news from that. I get a lot of connections from that, and like see what old people I know are up to. And yeah, I would be pretty annoyed about it. So I sympathize with people who are mad about the TikTok ban. Also on the free speech side, people, use it as an avenue of communicating and disseminating information widely. Gen Z obviously uses it the most heavily. And so from that standpoint, I think it is a net good, and I don't think we should be taking those platforms away or restricting their use at all.
I
So
agree with
even
that.
though the national security stuff makes sense to me, I think it's valid. I don't think that that in and of itself should be the reason to get rid of TikTok. But it was funny when they announced the ban and all the Gen Z people immediately flocked to the new, was it Red Note? It was the new
Yeah,
Chinese app.
yeah, that's
What
the
did-
English translation of the basically Chinese TikTok.
Yeah,
Um,
so everyone was hopping over there, and I feel like kind of missing the point, but also trying to like stick it to the US government.
yeah,
I personally don't get it, and I didn't think it was very funny either. I felt like it showed a lot of like weakness and vulnerability on the part of America's people, that they're kind of like that, I guess you could say desperate. But what did you think about that?
yeah, I did. Yeah, I remember seeing that, and I had no idea that this app even existed. I just remember, as I said, I'm a TikTok user, and usually um, I try to formulate my algorithm to make sure I don't get any sort of news on TikTok. Okay, that sounds so weird, but I don't like to receive news through my social media time, if that makes sense. And then all of a sudden I see all these news things on my For You page and I was like, this is not normal for my algorithm. And it was basically all about Gen Z like kind of flocking over to this other app, Red Note. Yeah, I found some humor in it in the beginning, and then I kind of looked more into it, and I was like, okay, guys, like, are we seriously actually downloading this? I kind of thought it was a joke. Like, everyone was like, yeah, like mass migration. Everyone was kind of acting like everyone was being like displaced. Like, there were a lot of jokes being like,
Refugees got thrown
yeah,
over?
exactly. People were
Yeah.
calling them like TikTok refugees, like on Red Note. I mean, I never downloaded Red Note because yeah, I didn't want to. I didn't think we were actually downloading it, but yeah, people were super into it, stuff like that. To the point that people were getting mad at each other on Red Note. This is through secondhand knowledge on TikTok because I did not download it, but people on TikTok were kind of making fun of the fact that all of a sudden everything had English subtitles on it. And it was kind of not customary to do that before all these Americans joined it. And then all of a sudden people were like having the Chinese influencers like have all these like American subtitle or not American English subtitles and people were getting mad at other people for being like, "Oh, well you're talking in English, you should have the home language is like Mandarin and like stuff like that like um as the subtitles too." So it was just an interesting like well I want to say it was like 48 hours of
Yeah.
people populating to Red Note. Like you really can't go that long without a doom scroll app. Like I thought that just said a lot about our generation in my opinion that I like for our generation not to stand for.
But I also, okay, so I have a theory about why Gen Z doesn't mind handing over their data. I mean, there's a couple theories here. But like we grew up in the aftermath of 9/11 and then the Patriot Act, where obviously government surveillance was the expectation. And so I
Mhm.
feel like a lot of people in Gen Z just kind of assume that the government is keeping tabs on them in some way, shape, or form. And so their data doesn't really like it's not something that they really value. But I don't think they understand how it could possibly be manipulated or used against them. I mean, it is being used against them, oftentimes like sold to data brokers who sell it to, advertisers, and they use that to like place their targeted ads, and then it's just kind of like this machine that keeps people in this like consumerist mentality. So I do think people's data is being used against them in those sorts of ways, and it is kind of nefarious in my view. But I don't think Gen Z really understands, let alone cares. They just kind of expect this to be the case. And so the argument about national security and like, oh, China's going to have your data, it doesn't really land with Gen Z because they're like, well, our government already has our data. I don't even know if I can trust our government. So like what does it matter if I give it over to China? Now, here, so that argument I can see and I do understand it, but the reason I don't like TikTok is because, like specifically TikTok, is because if the government, the CCP, which does have its hand in all of the Chinese businesses that it allows to exist, if the CCP does have its hand, they could use TikTok as a means of like feeding certain content to Americans and honestly like making people dumber. And this was a thing a couple of years ago. I remember having this conversation with our advisor when we were in media writing, talking about how the number one job that Americans aspired to be was an influencer, and in China it was like a astronaut or a scientist.
Yes,
And
I
there was
remember that conversation.
yeah, and there was very different content that was being promoted and like shoveled to kids in China versus the US, and it was having disparate impact on people's like aspirations and dreams in life. That to me is scary. Like
It's
regardless of the privacy and the data stuff, which is a concern to me, I think Gen Z should understand the CCP is not a good actor, and they need to be aware of that and cautious about what they're consuming.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that conversation with our shared advisor from our student media. But yeah, I do remember that. I totally forgot about that until you brought that up, and I do agree with you that that is kind of unsettling to me. And also, yeah, the influencer thing, like kids wanting to be influencers is actually crazy to me, like if that's a dream job. And um
We are commentators now, so
I know. Now that I'm like saying
do
it,
as
I'm
we say,
really
not do as we say, not as we do.
I know. I'm like, am I being hypocritical right now? But no, it is disheartening, a little disheartening to see that, and I think that that's insane. Before we move on from the TikTok comment too, I did want to, or TikTok section of our podcast episode, I did want to mention that on TikTok there are fact-checked warnings about misinformation, disinformation, and I'd never seen it before, but I also think it's interesting how against how against fact checking and censorship Trump claims to be. And he had now partnered with TikTok basically from what I'm understanding. And I think that's really interesting that they have that. There was basically trending that Elon Musk had done the Nazi salute, and it was comparing it to Hitler in kind of a stitched together video. I've saw it multiple times, and then I saw people complaining that their content kept getting taken down for spreading misinformation, basically, which again, as somebody who's very passionate about the First Amendment and free speech, like, and Colin too, I know you, I feel like I could speak for you for that too, is that I don't think that's right, as social media should be a public forum. I mean, if you guys listened last week, we said the same thing about Zuckerberg taking that away. So I think it's just ironic to me that once the fact checks benefit one side, then they're okay with it, if that makes sense.
Right, because Meta just got rid of its fact-checking services and said that it was going completely the community notes style, like X.
Mhm.
And now Twitter is kind of stepping in with fact checkers. You've never seen that before, but it's like this new development, and it seems strange in light of Meta's reversal on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when did they restore TikTok? Was it Sunday evening that there was the new message?
What? Okay, I'm like, what day is it right now? Yeah, I want to say it was basically Sunday morning. Like it wasn't too long after. I remember waking up that morning. I woke up around maybe 9-ish, and somebody had texted me at one point that morning and was like, TikTok's back up, blah, blah, blah. It was probably my younger sibling. Um, and I was with friends over the holiday weekend and we were talking about it, and my friends also, like I was with three of them, and they pulled it up and they're like, yeah, my TikTok's working, like there's no need to delete it and like all this stuff. So yeah, it was literally the world's shortest ban.
Yeah, and that message said something along the lines of like, thanks to the efforts of President Trump,
So
TikTok will be restored. And see, I don't understand the ins and outs on like a policy level of how one person can unilaterally say like we'll restore TikTok because it was a congressional ban on the
right.
app. So I don't really understand all of the nuances of it. I think I speak for everyone when I say I'm extremely confused about those parts actually, the policy aspect. But I do have from a secondhand source on somewhat good authority that there was some, it was a conditional thing where, Trump has reversed himself on TikTok openly, where back a couple of years ago, he said it should be banned. Now, obviously, he's kind of like stepping in as the savior of TikTok. And I would just caution people, I don't think it's because he's a free speech champion. I
Yeah. Oh, I 100% don't think that.
I think it was very much a conditional thing where he was saying, like, if the optics of this are in my favor and I can be the one to step in and restore it, like, I don't think this is my complete opinion. I don't think that he cares whether or not people have their data given over to China or not. He really just cares, does this play well with the Gen Z audience, which arguably it does. So I guess it's a win for him and a win for Gen Z who uses it. But I wouldn't let this inform people's opinions on Trump's stance towards free speech, which is something that's very questionable. He has a bad track record of antagonism and, toward the media and Section 230 and dissemination of information. As the one who initially had proposed a TikTok ban. So,
Yeah, his popularity on TikTok is interesting to me in general. Um, Colin, again, I know you didn't use it, but he wasn't on TikTok for the longest. Like I said, he was a TikTok hater for so long, and then all of a sudden he got a TikTok page. I want to say during election season. I can't I can't remember. And then all of a sudden his TikTok was one of the most popular pages. Like it was everywhere. He got so many followers in so little time, and it was just interesting. And then because he got TikTok, so many like diehard Trump supporters got TikTok too, like right after he did, and was like, oh, if Trump's getting it, then of course I'm okay to get it. And that's what I think is scary when you so blindly follow somebody, anyone, any politician who I don't think politicians should be idolized in general. But yeah, that's also my opinion.
I'm also hearing as of today, so it's Tuesday the 21st, but I'm hearing people saying that on Meta or like Instagram that they're being automatically like assigned to follow Trump and that they've unfollowed him several times and it keeps like refollowing him. Like I've heard this from one of my friends who leans more left Democrat, and she said that she had to unfollow Trump three separate times because it was basically like there's something going on people are trying to understand, is there like, are they giving him followers somehow and like expecting that people won't notice, or is it a glitch? Like I've heard this from at least two sources. So for
That's
whatever that's worth,
great.
yeah.
Um, yeah, that's really crazy. Do you have anything else to add about this section?
I don't think so. I think that's all I got for TikTok, and also we're coming down to it on this call. Okay, so we are back from a little intermission and wanted to bring up one thing before we go to the next topic related to TikTok. But when we were at USD, there was actually kind of a funny parallel situation where on campus we had this app called Fizz. It was this anonymous app that kind of emerged out of the woodwork one winter semester. Abby was like away abroad, so she didn't experience this, but it just emerged one January and everyone was on it. Everyone was posting and sometimes getting like, I don't know, getting into like bullying and saying harsh stuff to one another. And so the school tried to crack down on it after about a year and a half of it being a platform that everyone was using.
Hmm.
And I know like ASG, the student government in their election cycle brought this up as a campaign issue. Like, could we get rid of Fizz and ban it? And they said they wanted to do that, but then they ran into some obstacles with actually shutting it down. And I think it was like privacy and free speech reasons that they couldn't. And so they essentially issued like a joint statement from the student government and the university saying like, we can't necessarily shut this platform down, but just know like things are going on that we're aware of. And if anyone does anything identifying on the app that we can trace back to them, then they could face punishments from the school or criminal charges of some kind. So depending on the nature of what was being done. But I don't know, what did you think about that? Is there any parallel to TikTok there?
Yeah, I mean, I it's hard for me to say like how much we could parallel it in terms of it's really easy to look at a bubble like your university, especially our private smaller university and the whole country in comparison because I truly did get where ASG and the school was coming from when it came to Fizz. Like people were just downright mean on it.
It was
And I
heinous.
yeah, yeah, truly. Like so mean. Like people were literally like people were posting people's addresses. My friend, his address got posted on that app and was like, "Oh, a party's gonna be here." And people they literally had to like stay home that night. It was like a Friday night and we were in college like and had to turn people away. I don't know. I just thought that's crazy. I mean, we're just normal people. People shouldn't have their address like doxed like that. I don't know. It's hard for me to compare at such a small scale in the community versus like the country, in my opinion.
Yeah, and one of the things about Fizz was it was completely anonymous too, and that really made it harder to get a handle on. And I know that obviously they were trying to kind of get it cleaned up a little bit, but I don't know. I should text people back at USD and ask them if it's still a thing, because we were kind of in competition with Fizz as the student
Yes.
newspaper versus this new platform like social media that connected everyone. People would pull up Fizz if anything was going on campus, and we would sometimes use Fizz to track down sources and get credible people on the record. But because we had more stringent standards of what we could publish, and Fizz was a free-for-all, they got a lot of attention that we tried to, divert back toward us.
Yeah.
To, I would say, moderate success. We did okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I don't know. It's again hard for me to, because again, I'm like a very big advocate for free speech, so it's really hard for me to um kind of compare things and not say that I didn't like Fizz. I mean, I just really didn't. And maybe that was biases, but we also, I mean, not that we didn't use it. Like I never personally, actually I did personally get it, but I only used it for Vista reasons. Like I actually only used it for Vista reasons. I would post like students with our newspaper. I would do like anonymous polls about the Vista and like if you actually read it, but I was not a Fizz user in that way.
Yeah, like it was entertaining, but beyond that, it could be really upsetting and troubling. But anyway, maybe it's
Anyway,
still,
let's move
maybe
on.
it's not. Who knows? So yeah, let's get into our next topic, which is a bit of a pivot, the confirmation hearings for Trump's cabinet picks. It started off last Monday with Pete Hegseth, and I know that there's a lot to say about him as a selection. So do you have anything, Abby?
Yeah, obviously I mean, maybe it's not obvious, but I don't really like him as a person. Um, there's a lot of allegations against him and his own mother kind of said something negative. What did she say about him again? And then she ended up retracting it, but
There was a text message that his mom sent him that the New York Times published, I believe, and
yeah,
then she retracted that and said, "Actually, I don't believe this anymore. It was like a spur of the moment. I was really angry when I sent that." And she went on, I think, Fox and Friends and kind of like walked it all back. But it did get a story and it got published, got out there, where she was basically saying that he treated women badly.
yeah, that's what it was.
So.
I mean, I can't imagine somebody's like own mother saying it, but I don't think it's I mean, I don't think it's right that if her text got like leaked or anything like that. I don't think that's right either. But
Yeah, and so the allegations against him, I'm not going to delve into it too much because other people I think have covered it better and more completely. I would point people toward Megyn Kelly's breakdown and analysis of the allegations themselves. And then she did an exclusive interview with Hegseth, and she was
Mhm.
actually at Capitol Hill for the hearing as well to sit in on it. So, I mean, people can make of that what they will. She was a coworker of his at Fox for a time. So, whatever conclusions people come to from all of that information is up to them, but there's more detailed stuff about the allegations than I personally can offer.
Yeah, I also didn't do a lot of research on that aspect. I listened to one of Megyn Kelly's episodes. I think it was the first episode you referenced because she did talk about her experience actually being there. She described it as really boring, which like I could so see. I can't imagine like sitting there all day and still being lucid during it. What did you think about that, Colin?
Well, just to wrap up the thing about the allegations, he was accused um, at the time of sexual assault, and then no charges were brought, and they eventually settled, and so it kind of disappeared until this confirmation process, where it gets all this stuff gets kind of dredged up from the past. And so, like, we've seen this happen with other nominees before, like Clarence Thomas with Anita Hill, um, Brett Kavanaugh with Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. So we've seen this happen before, but in this case, people were definitely wondering, is this going to sink his nomination or not? I certainly, when I heard the details of the allegations, I thought it sounded very bad. I think there's details about his personal life that are well established, like the fact that he cheated on his wives. I think he has had three wives and cheated on the first two. And like there's evidence out there that like that in and of itself is enough for me to kind of be like, okay, I wouldn't trust him as a leader, as an authority figure. But obviously people are still making up their minds about this, and that includes the senators who are tasked with questioning him in these confirmation hearings. And to the point about it being boring, it didn't seem like it would be boring to me because he was fielding questions from a lot of people who were, really wanted answers, and some of them more aggressive than others. But
Yeah.
the Democrat senators were obviously questioning him pretty hard. You had like Kristen Gillibrand, Tammy Duckworth, Mazie Hirono. Elizabeth Warren, Tim Kaine, they were all kind of dogpiling him. And I think he was able to kind of fend it off pretty well because he is a TV personality and he has other credentials as well. But I thought he was able to conduct himself really well. But does that really speak to his integrity, his leadership capability? I would argue perhaps not. But
Yeah, I thought that the heckling was a little over the top within that setting. I think that some people will argue that it's not super relevant to bring up the personal lives of politicians or our leaders or whatever because like I hear the argument that that's not their job, like whatever goes on behind closed doors, like that's their thing, like you wouldn't like want somebody delving into your personal life, but I'm not a fan of that argument. I think that character has a lot to do with leadership, and I think it's a very valid thing to question people's character and bring up maybe some things that have happened in the past, especially if it's as serious as sexual assault or harassment. Like, I mean, like, or violence against women, for example. I think that's very important to bring up in regard to our leaders because, I mean, half of our population is women, so I think that's super important. But within the setting, I did think that it was not that I was there the whole day or anything, but from what I heard, I did think that there's a time and place for such things to come up. Um, I I thought that it was not enough about the actual maybe position or what he believed about the military and the future of what he was going to do with it. I think that as he's somebody with a military background, which I think should be beneficial, right? Like, I know, I feel like there's this argument that people with backgrounds within that field should be leaders and a part of it. Like, um, if you're part of the media, then you should have kind of grown your way up into that. And I think that's a pretty valid argument. I think I don't know very much about the military, but I do think it's valid for somebody to have been within that processes and now is a leader of what they had gone through, if that makes sense. I don't know if I just butchered what I was trying to say, but
well, yeah, so I think he had served in combat, but he wasn't necessarily like a general. So
right.
he'd worked his way up, but he wasn't like the top tier leadership within the military. And then obviously he went on to have a career in broadcast TV with Fox. And so some people would argue like, well, wouldn't you want the general to be the head of the Department of Defense as opposed to a someone who ended up in media? So that's kind of the argument, but I think you're saying that having someone who was a lower level within the military could actually be of benefit because it
Beneficial.
speaks
Yes.
more toward the actual internal military than someone viewing it from an aerial perspective. So yeah, I don't know. I could see that. I do have some questions because obviously the Department of Defense is the biggest budget of any
Right.
government department. I think I heard 980 billion thrown out, I think was the number that I heard. And some 200 plus I forget the number of employees, but it's a lot. It's the
A
biggest
lot.
department within the military, the biggest budget. And so there's some questions about does he have the management experience to oversee all of that? And that was something that also came up during his confirmation hearing. So I think that's a valid question. And if I was to poke holes in his nomination for any reason, that would be the way that I would probably approach it is he qualified purely from that perspective of having the capacity to oversee this huge organization.
Yes, I agree with that as well. Um, I I know that he's also made some comments about like women not belonging within that line of work. I 100% disagree with that. I think anyone who is capable of me, like me as a woman, no, I don't think I personally could, but I know many strong, capable people, women who definitely could be within that field. And as long as you pass all of the tests, like the physical aspect, the mental aspect, um, I think that you should be able to serve if you want to.
Yeah, actually, my older sister is in the Navy and my cousin is in the Army. And when I think about what they're capable of, I certainly think that they add a lot to the military, and I would trust them with my life 100%. I think there's a bit of a distinction between serving in the military versus serving in combat. And when I think about it from that standpoint, I don't know. It is really tough because I wouldn't want my sister to be out on a front line. That sounds horrendous to me. She's actually expecting a baby right now and is doing some other duty besides like being on a ship. But I wouldn't want her on a ship either because of like the chemicals and all the pollutants and just like the disorderliness that might go on a ship. But it's not that she isn't capable of it. I just think it's a question of is it in her best interest or not? I tend to say like let people make their own decisions. Like if they think that that's what they want to do, and then like you said, they're capable of meeting all the same standards, then yes, they should be allowed to combat or serve, whichever. But I do think the distinction between serving in the military versus serving on the front lines in combat is a little bit different. So yeah, and just to go back to the confirmation hearing itself,
Hmm.
I thought it was a little bit of like grandstanding going on with the
Yeah.
senators. I thought that they were kind of trying to get like a soundbite that they could play for the people back home and just show like, oh, I really like held his feet to the fire, and stood up for what I believe. And that's fine. But I also don't think that that should be the role of these confirmation hearings. I think it should be to really assess, again, the qualifications and capability of the person in the role. And that's basically it. And that's not really what I saw from Hegseth's confirmation hearing. So
Oh, okay,
did you have
sorry.
anything
It just
else?
froze for a second, but you're back. Um, any last thoughts about that?
Well, actually, yeah, one more thing. There was the one senator from Oklahoma, Mullen, was calling out the other senators saying like, you're all a bunch of hypocrites. I'm paraphrasing, but like he was saying like, who among us is innocent in all these different ways, and if we wouldn't hold up to this scrutiny, why should we place a cabinet nominee under that scrutiny? And I don't know, I agreed with his message, but I did think it was a little bit kind of like awkward how he inserted that in there. And even though I agree that like we should do with less grandstanding in hearings, maybe it was like his tone that wasn't quite resonating with me.
Yeah, I can't remember the tone off the top of my head, but I definitely agree with you about kind of the just like that time and place aspect that I was talking about earlier. But yeah, I agree that as um politicians though, and as our leaders, it's valid to me to go through those things, but maybe just not within that
I think
environment.
you're absolutely right about like character and integrity kind of cut across the domains of someone's life. So the way that they conduct themselves in character and integrity in personal life, I think like you're saying, it does speak to their leadership as well.
Yes.
So I'm 100% on board with what you're saying too. And as for the other nominees in their hearings, they had Pam Bondi, who's up for AG, go. I thought she did pretty well. She was getting kind of the same treatment from like Adam Schiff, but I thought she conducted herself well and kind of got out unscathed. So my assumption is all of the nominees are probably going to get confirmed, especially with the way
Yeah.
the Senate is split with 53 Republicans. So
Yeah. I also agree with that. I think these nominees that we're seeing are probably going to be a part of it.
we can probably move on to the continuing wildfire situation. If you
Hmm. Um, yeah, I haven't checked the map in a couple days, but remind me there are still fires going on in I think are they all contained in the Palisades in particular? Do you know?
I'm not up to date with the latest, but I think that there's more winds picking up, but I do think they have more of a handle on it. And as for my friend who I interviewed and we posted that to our channel, she's back in her house. So I don't know. People are kind of, I think, surveying the damage and trying to get a handle on, like what their life is going to be like moving forward. But I don't think there's any ongoing sort of active spread of the fire. At the very least, I think it is kind of localized, and all this could again change with the winds picking up, perhaps. But
Yeah.
everyone I've talked to says that the situation is looking up there.
My friend who his house was burned down, his whole area in Altadena, I think is how I pronounce it. Um, and they still haven't been allowed back in the area to like see if there's any remains of their house or possessions. So I know that is something that they haven't done yet. I was actually over the holiday weekend, I was in Temecula for a couple days visiting a friend, and then I was in the Inland Empire, and it's really interesting to be over there because it's kind of near and it's very, very, very windy in both areas. And my friend, he just texted me this morning actually and said that there were some fires in Temecula, which was really interesting to me because I just left there. And also in the Inland Empire, it was very, very windy, very foggy. Um, and they were also a little worried about keeping an eye on the map, our mutual friend in the Inland Empire, in case that they even had to do some evacuations.
Yeah, I saw the New York Times was reporting that there was three fires in San Diego recently, starting with like the Poway area, and then there was actually a fire right across from Fashion Valley Mall. Did you see
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I was actually, yeah, we haven't even talked about this. I was going to send you the link to this article that one of our mutual friends sent us or sent me too. And I was so surprised. Like one of our friends, a mutual friend of both Colin and I's, got evacuated um, from USD basically area. Kind of by Pack, and people by Pack is apartments across the street from sorry, all of a sudden it turned into a personal FaceTime call. Pack is the apartments across the street from Colin and I's alma mater, and it's very, very close to our school. And some people were getting evacuated from that area as well, which is so crazy to me.
Yeah, I saw this video on, I guess it was Instagram, and the whole like hillside across from Fashion Valley Mall was going up in flames and smoke. It was crazy. And I know that area super, super well because I would run past it, like probably run there like 100 times. And yeah, I don't know. Like it was disconcerting, and it made me kind of in its own like very small way. I felt for the people of LA because I can't imagine what they're going through. The scale of what they're going through is so much larger than just that one little hillside, but it was alarming just to see that. So
Yeah.
I yeah, I can't imagine how they're all rebuilding and gonna be hopefully improving, but it's going to take a long time. And a lot of that's going to come down to like permitting, different regulation, different restrictions on when they're going to be able to actually rebuild. And I know we'd also brought up this point about people, like you remember the Maui fires when there was that horrible fire that wiped out most of Lahaina and Maui. And in the aftermath of that, there was a lot of people buying up land. And there was a lot of controversy about this because while it is giving some revenue to the people who lost their homes, also the people who are buying it up might have other interests other than just, doing a good deed, you could say.
Yeah.
And so have you seen anything with that around what's going on with LA?
Not in particular. Personally, I haven't seen anything like that. I feel like I've been seeing a lot of just regular people kind of wondering what's going to happen next, basically. And to your point, these people are stressed about whether or not they're going to be able to afford living in the same place if they'd like to, and how fast that rebuilding process is going to go, and how much money that they're personally going to have to put into it. Um, yeah, it's just not a cheap or ideal situation to be in. Um,
Yeah,
I
I did have one correction on last week's episode because we had mentioned that the Hollywood sign had gotten damaged, but
yes.
I saw that that was a fake story that was going around and very convincingly, but it was I think like altered video or photos of damage to the Hollywood sign. So yeah, just wanted to clarify on that, but it's crazy how people are kind of exploiting the situation for their own aim, even if their own aim is just to like sow confusion. It's kind of strange to me.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, especially because this is people just losing their homes and stuff. That sucks like that. Um, Especially as people, I feel like we try to be so media literate. So it's like we brought this up last episode and I fully believed that until um reading and seeing that it was false within the document that we have. So I actually got that information from you. So that's a good correction to make.
Yeah, have you seen anything about updates on people's opinions about the leadership in LA? I know you had watched or you'd listened to Pod Save America with Gavin Newsom. Did that change your opinion at all?
I kind of felt like he went around it. I don't know. I didn't listen to the full interview because I didn't think he should have been taking interviews that early, to be honest. It seemed kind of I think tone deaf might be too strong of a word to use in that scenario, but last episode, Colin and I both touched about how we felt it was such a just a humanitarian crisis, like just about people, and it shouldn't have been politicized. Um, I I don't think people like the way that Newsom is handling things, but also California is such a huge state that I'm like, is it solely his fault, or is he just the head of California? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I I don't know the name of the LA County mayor or anything like that, or who's in leadership like lower and lower because I'm not from LA and I didn't do too much research about it. But I do think to myself, whose fault is it? Like I do think the government let people down in that scenario, though.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll come to some conclusions about how and who, but it's probably gonna be an unfolding story for a while.
Yeah. And another thing about rebuilding that I wanted to say too is if this is going to be an issue in this area and living there too, it's unfortunate that building the infrastructure that is built to handle the fires is more expensive because there's a lack of incentive for people to want to build it like those companies to want to build it and insurance companies to give money to it when the infrastructure, which is like maybe the root solution to this, right? Like if building buildings that can withstand fire is going to be more beneficial for the people who live here, why not do it? Well, it's unfortunate that it all comes back down to the money. And that's just something I also wanted to kind of plug really fast too. Like if that is the solution, as of right now, I'm interested to see if they're going to do that or if people are going to choose not to. The people in power, the people who have the money to do so.
Yeah, sort of like this issue of long-term solutions versus the immediate aftermath. And yeah, I think there's a lot wrapped up with the insurability of these locations, like you were saying, and if that's going to be something that gets reconfigured after everything that's happened.
Yeah.
So, okay, I think we can go to our last little bonus topics. These are ones I feel pretty strongly about, but I don't know how you feel about it. So, what about the pardons that Biden issued in his last, like, let's say like month or so of office, but like really right at the end, he issued several right before the inauguration of his family, Dr. Fauci, and General Milley, of to name a few. So, what did you think of all that?
I I was surprised, but I wasn't, right? Like I honestly pity him a lot. I won't lie. Like how I feel like his legacy is leaving, especially right before Trump, like he like people don't like him and I he's just like some old man to me at this point because I imagine like my grandpa in
Same
office.
age as my grandpa,
Yeah,
by like
so
a
my
month.
grandpa's a
They're
lot
separate.
my
Yeah.
grandpa's a lot younger than him, and I imagine him in office and I want to cry. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, I just feel so much pity for him, and I honestly feel like these pardons feel like some last minute like Hail Mary type thing, and it almost feels as if he's preparing for retaliation, if that makes sense to me. I don't know. I know you feel very strongly.
Yeah, well, so he definitely is prepared for retaliation, and that's I think why he justified doing it was he doesn't want to start this chain of political prosecutions or set this precedent, and so he's preemptively pardoning people. But in so doing, I think he's kind of implying that there's something to be pardoned, and so it kind of casts more aspersion, more doubt on the people who he's pardoning than I think if he just left it alone. Plus, some of the people, like Dr. Fauci in particular, I feel like do have a lot to explain. And to give them like this blanket pardon that goes back 10 years to 2014, yeah, I don't like it. I think if anything comes out of it, I've heard that now they can't plead the Fifth Amendment because there's no that you plead the Fifth Amendment because you don't want to self-incriminate, but since they've already been pardoned, they can no longer plead the Fifth. So now they are like obligated to answer any questions asked of them in like a court or a Congress setting. So there might be some really interesting congressional hearings coming up. I will certainly be watching if they do happen. But yeah, just this idea of pardoning people again, it just creates this feeling of like two tiers of justice where people who have an in or are powerful can get off on whatever they may or may not have done. I'll put it that way. And everyone else,
Allegedly.
it's like good luck. But that's a good place to leave it for this week. Because next week we're going to talk about all of Trump's pardons with
Yes.
the J6 crowd. And so I'm sure we can draw many comparisons between what Biden's doing on his way out and what Trump is doing on his way into office.
Yes.
All right, so I think that's it for this week, and thanks everyone for watching. Um, I wanted to touch a little bit on why we're doing this podcast, which I mentioned at the front, but we really wanted to emphasize the importance of people in Gen Z speaking up and sharing their opinions because we noticed from our time in student media that people are kind of hesitant to do so in our age group. I think that sometimes they're afraid of being canceled for what they believe or not saying it quite right. And in the internet era, everything that you say and that you post kind of finds a permanent place where everyone can go back and look and see like what did you say at this time in your life. And I don't know. I think that it's important to share what we think, even though our opinions might change at some point in the future. And as long as people are able to explain how they went from point A to point B, why they changed their opinion, that we should get better at allowing that and supporting each other for speaking up. Because I think that there's a greater cost sometimes to not speaking up as opposed to saying what you think.
Yeah, 100% agree with Colin. I used to have this thing where I used to always say, oh, I could never be the opinion editor because I'm so scared my opinion's going to change all the time. And like, what if I can't back what I used to believe in? But I have faith and grace to myself and to other people who might feel this way that, again, like what Colin said, as long as you can kind of trace why what you're saying at that time, everything needs context. And yeah, I'm really glad that we're putting ourselves out there like this, and hopefully it is something that inspires others in our generation as well to speak up and talk about these things and do research and yeah, share their opinions.
All right, sounds good. See you all next week. Washed up out.